What's up, guys? How are you doing? Welcome back to the channel. I hope everyone's doing well. We're about to watch this Andrew Chang video. I love his videos. The way he, articulates and the way he puts his videos together. Very informative. Now we're going to check this one out. Is Trump right about Canada being a military free rider? The last video that I did of Trump and Carney when they did the meeting, Trump was saying, we're going to continue to protect you. And he said that more than one time. And I was just kind of wondering why he was saying that. But now, what they trying to say, like Canada is just getting a free ride, military ride, wise, like America's going to protect you because you're our neighbors. Let's see what the hell. I don't know what Trump is trying to say. I don't even know what's a military free rider? What is that? For real. Somebody who's freeloading for the military services? You know what I mean? Just for the protection? They getting free protection? Is that what he's trying to say? That's crazy. But anyway, let's watch this video.
It seems like almost every politician in Canada is laser focused on one thing right now.
Donald Trump.
President Trump.
Donald Trump is making it crystal clear. He is not joking about Canada becoming the 51st state.
Pushing forward with his tariff threat.
The federal government is trying to placate
crazy.
the U.S. president by ramping up border security at his request, making the case for why things like tariffs hurt everybody. And now, it seems, their attention is turning to another one of Trump's biggest grievances about Canada.
They have a very small military. They rely on our military. We basically protect Canada.
Yes, Canada's military. Trump believes Canada is taking advantage of the U.S., essentially expecting the Americans to defend it in an emergency, while contributing much less than promised to its own military.
The Americans believe that we're free riding on the security that they provide.
There are a number of people in the U.S. defense and national security community that absolutely think that Canada is a military free rider.
So, is it? About a decade ago, at a meeting in Wales, NATO countries all agreed they'd aim to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense by 2024. The idea being that no one country, namely the US, would be stuck carrying the military weight of that alliance. Canada is part of NATO and signed that agreement. What it didn't do in the years that followed is reach that goal. In 2024, NATO estimates that Canada spent just under 1.4% of its GDP on defense. That's coming up somewhere close to $20 billion short.
Senior members of Congress, both houses, but including Republicans, have come out and said that Canada is underspending on national defense, not living up to its commitments, and basically taking advantage of the American security umbrella without contributing sufficiently to collective Western defense.
I love the Canadian people. They're great. But we're spending hundreds of billions a year to protect it. Our military is at their disposal.
And this isn't new. Military spending was an irritant for Trump during his first term, too.
We'll put Canada on a payment plan, right? I'm sure the Prime Minister would love that.
Wow, yeah.
What is your number?
The number we talk about is 70% increase over these past years.
Okay. Where are you now in terms of your number?
We're at 135?
1.3.
1.4.
That number, 1.4%, that was in 2019, and it's barely budged. And this at a time when NATO countries are feeling increasingly threatened by their most powerful adversary.
Across the NATO alliance, there's been a really significant increase in defense spending and defense preparation in response to what Russia did in February of 2022.
For whatever reason, it didn't motivate the same levels of spending.
Yeah, my man.
Canada wasn't always an outlier. Back
sorry.
in 2021, before the war in Ukraine began, you know how many NATO countries actually did meet their 2% spending goal? Only 6 out of 31 countries that signed the agreement. So Canada had lots of company. But for 2024, it's
Canada
projected that
wasn't
23
even
of
close,
or almost 75% of those countries will have met that target. Canada is among only 8 that won't, and it sits pretty close to the bottom of the pack.
And Canada can't really hide behind that mob mentality anymore. It's an outlier, and it's not just perception. Data points to that.
And that 2% target isn't the only target Canada's missing either. NATO members are also expected to put 20% of their defense spending towards military equipment. Last year, Canada was one of only 2 countries that didn't. And according to a recent Canadian Department of National Defence report, almost half of Canada's existing military equipment is unavailable and unserviceable.
We underinvested for too long a period of time, and now we both don't have the numbers to back up our commitments in terms of the spending, but we don't actually have the results of what that spending would give us in terms of more aircraft, more vehicles, more ships to actually contribute operationally in a way that the Americans would care about.
The pressure really started ramping up on Canada to fulfill its NATO commitments last year. In July, NATO members met in Washington. Back then, Canada's official plan was to spend about 1.8% of its GDP on defense by 2030. Americans didn't like that plan.
Shamefully, Canada announced in the last few days, or last couple of days, that they won't be ponying up. They're not going to do their 2%. Why? Talk about riding on America's coattails.
What kind of signal does it send for Canada to be in the G7 when it essentially mocks the bare minimum of what's required?
Going into that summit, we were basically the only ally that was not only falling short of our spending commitment, but didn't even yet have a plan to get there.
And then, seemingly out of nowhere, on the last day of the summit,
Canada fully expects to reach NATO's 2% of GDP spending target by 2032.
That wasn't a small thing. Importantly, at least politically, it bought Canada time.
So Canada will now put in place a plan to be at 2% within a few years. So that means that all those allies who are not yet at 2%, they have a plan in place to be at 2%.
But the Americans still weren't happy.
I do not speak for the President of the United States, the President-elect of the United States. If he were in this room, you would get a very large guffaw from him. I'm talking about 2032. It's got to be better than that.
But in their eyes, it really wasn't, because not only was Canada effectively saying it would make its target 8 years late, at the time, officials didn't actually lay out any concrete details about how to get there.
So we have a timeline, they're going to meet it by 2032, no details as to how they'll actually achieve a massive undertaking, a massive amount of spending that will come as a result of this new commitment.
In April, the government did release a new plan to boost defense spending, mostly in Canada's north. But in the Trudeau government's last fiscal update, the fall economic statement, there was no new money for defense beyond what was already originally planned. And according to Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office, they aren't even on track to reach their original goal of 1.8%. This was just from this past October. Based on our analysis and independent GDP projections, the government's latest military spending forecast reaches only 1.58% of GDP by 2029-2030. That's worth repeating. 1.58% by 2030, because what the government is saying now is that it can reach 2% even sooner by 2027.
Just to clarify, in 2 years, you think you can hit 2% of GDP spending?
I think it's absolutely achievable.
That's 5 years ahead of the schedule they had just 6 months ago. But
and what's the
once
plan?
Again, they haven't explained how they're going to get there.
What's the plan to pay for it? Where's the money going to come from?
It's remarkably difficult to maneuver Canadian tax dollars to achieve something like a sudden increase in defense spending.
So what's the rush? Why yet another announcement without a costed public plan to go along with it? Well, Donald Trump is the X factor.
He's weaponizing tariffs to get various concessions out of America's trading partners.
We basically painted a target on ourselves that says, hey, you can call us out for our defense spending.
And if we don't meet it, it's pretty clear there's going to be hell to pay.
There's no real way for the US or any other country to force Canada to bump up its defense spending, because those NATO commitments aren't binding. This agreement to try to hit 2% of GDP on military spending, it's not a requirement of membership, just a statement of intent. But this is still a vulnerability, and Canada's premiers know this.
We have repeatedly at our joint conferences asked for the federal government to take that 2% target seriously, and I think we have to if we're going to avoid any future trade actions.
We're just worried that if the federal government doesn't fulfill that obligation it has direct ramifications on the provinces.
We want good jobs in Manitoba. A ton of those come from trade with the U.S., and so we need to be a good NATO partner.
There are a couple of ways Trump could play this card. We can't read his mind, but we can point to what his top economic advisor has said. In a recent policy paper, he argued tariffs could be implemented in a way that offers graduated scales. Countries that are happy to help share the burden and work to be inside the security zone will likely receive lighter tariffs. Basically, the more you share this burden of defense, the more money you spend on your military, the lighter the tariffs against you would be. But in this same paper, there's also another, slightly more threatening suggestion. First, there's the stick of tariffs. Second, there is the carrot of the defense umbrella and the risk of losing it. The risk of losing it, meaning losing the guarantee that the U.S. will defend you.
A prime minister stood up and he said to me, "Sir, could I ask you a question? You're saying we have to pay our bills. If we don't pay our bills, will the United States protect us from Russia?" I said, "If you don't pay, you mean you're delinquent?" He said, "Yes." He said, "If you're delinquent, we will not protect you."
Now, you might wonder, can Trump actually do this? Effectively ignore the mutual defense clause of NATO if he decides a country has contributed less than he'd like? Because remember, the 2% target was always just a target, maybe even an expectation, but not a legal requirement. Well, first of all, in Trump's defense, the mutual defense clause is vague. It does say an armed attack against one shall be considered an attack against them all, and it orders member nations to assist the party or parties so attacked, using such action as it deems necessary, which can include the use of armed force. But it doesn't have to. So the US may be able to scale its response up and down, or maybe Trump just rips up the agreement and leaves NATO. But it never really even has to come to any of that because it's the threat that matters.
If that threat was delivered to me, would I be comfortable playing chicken with Canadians' security and possibly their prosperity? And the answer is no, that is not a gamble to take. So whether the threat is hyperbole or whether it's real, I think in this context, we have to take the president's threats seriously.
But here's one last thing. Even if Canada is able to convince Trump that it's now suddenly on a path to 2% in just 2 years, even that might not be enough.
I'm also going to ask all NATO nations to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP, which is what it should have been years ago.
Certainly, if the U.S. administration is going to take a tough line and push for a higher number, they've got lots of leverage to really increase it. But I think there's a very reasonable consensus outside of Canada that 2% isn't sufficient.
So no matter where that number ends up, it's pretty clear that Canada is far, far away from where the Trump administration wants it to
1.4,
be. And that, in and of itself, is a vulnerability for this country at a time when its political leaders are trying desperately to project strength.
Andrew Che, boy, I love that dude, boy. That boy videos would be on the hit. But yeah, listen, just like the lady said, you have to take this serious. The thing is that Canada, I'm not into all these spendings and all this, but just from the video, I get my information from this video. If you're at 1.3, you gotta get up there to 2 point. You gotta get up there to 2% because you do not want Trump to be hanging this type of thing over your head. You know what I mean? Like when they did the graph, it showed that Canada wasn't the only one that didn't meet the requirements, but Canada was way in the back. They were one of the last countries, and that's tough. For real. So yeah, and if he bumps it up to 5%, that's impossible for Canada. They're not even at 1.4, they're at 1.37. Man, come on. So I guess a free rider, a military free rider, is a person that's dependent on you're dependent on the American military to protect you. You don't want that. You listen. I don't know how things are going between the countries. You know, I understand about the tariffs. I understand about this here. But you do not want Trump holding this thing over your head. But if you can get up to 2% and that can stop lower some of the tariffs, that's even better. I think Trump just wants everyone pulling their weight in this regards. But anyway, let me know what you guys thought about the video. Let me know how you feel about these the percentage and all of this. Do you feel like Canada's a free rider? The way the video's, and you know what else I like about the video is because they'll talk about the United States, but this time they're talking about Canada and letting Canadians know that even us, we need to get things in order. The Canadians, I'm not Canadian, but you know, I'm just speaking as I'm the video people, letting the Canadians know that even Canada needs to get some things in order as well. We're not perfect, and I like that. You know what I mean? That shows diversity on both sides. You're not just 100% downing the U.S. You know, you will take accountability for the stuff that you're doing as well, and that's important, especially for me as an American. You know, it's good, it's funny to have videos talking about America. Okay, I'm cool with that. Laugh at that, but when it's just all videos talking about Americans, you know, if it's some videos that's talking about Canada or other countries as well, send those to me. I'll check those out as well. You know what I mean? But let me know what you thought about the video, and I'll see you in the next one.